The Job Insanity Podcast with Erik ten Haven. Episode number 6. Let the show begin.
Today, I'm talking to Thor Holt. Thor is a coach, a trained professional actor, a podcast host, and a former TEDx speaker who believes everyone should be free to make a bigger impact. In 2011, he founded a communication coaching business to serve the legal, higher education, and entrepreneurial sectors. Thor is a previous workshop leader at MIT and coached technical startup teams with their pitching. In August 2013, he was invited to become an entrepreneur in residence in MIT. A real honor. Currently, Thor delivers business storytelling masterclasses around Scotland, and he's the host of the Write with Courage podcast and the Shetland Times podcasts. There, he regularly interviews interesting writers, actors, musicians, filmmakers, and thinkers. And in this podcast, he will share his views on how life as a coach is and also what he learns from doing these interviews with other people. Let's hand it over to Thor right away and jump straight into the interview. So I think to start off with, to create a bit of context, could you, you mentioned just now, you actually have always been working with companies from your own initiative, from your own individual coaching kind of approach. Could you say a little bit how you decided to get into that? How did you decide to start doing this kind of work and not, as you mentioned just now, not go for a corporate career?
Yeah. So I'll keep it pretty short, Erik, because I don't want to bore you with a massive long story. Basically, as a child, I had this idea. I had a very vivid imagination, and I kind of had this idea of doing something that was of service to people somehow. And I used to have these flights of fantasy where I thought I would be an amazing soldier, or I thought I was going to join the Marines. I had these ideas, and looking back on it now as a 43-year-old, I realized it was more the idea of service, and it was more the kind of dramatic idea of being, a heroic soldier that was what appealed to me, because as a 16 and then an 18-year-old, I attempted to join the Marines in the UK. And as a 16-year-old, I was found physically very wanting. And also, from an emotional and maturity point of view, I was nowhere near ready. At 18, they said, yeah, physically you're ready, but we aren't going to give you a university scholarship. So you need to carry on to university, which I was planning to do. And then maybe afterwards we would take you. But you know what? I just don't think I would have been a good soldier. I had an experience with the territorial army, which is, like the part-time army, as a 17-year-old kid, where I went to a training camp and I got really homesick. I just wasn't emotionally ready. And I don't think I would, and I actually left that camp. I don't think I would have made a good soldier. I just don't think I was, certainly not at that point, emotionally tough enough.
Right.
So really, I had lucky escape, and so did the forces. Like, if I had managed to get into the Marines, I just think I would have been, certainly at that age, an awful soldier. I just don't think I had it maturity-wise, mentally to be able to do it. So that being said, I went to university, and by the end of university, my eyesight had failed a bit anyway, and so I found out that I wouldn't have the required eyesight to get into the Marines. So that was kind of put to one side. And I was left with a very early career crisis, if you like. I was left in a situation, or I put myself in a situation where I just didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. So bearing in mind, as a youngster, I'd had this idea of service and potentially joining the Marines or the Army, and I did flirt with the idea of being a teacher for a while, and I did a little bit of teaching experience, work at schools and things. But none of that seemed to be right somehow, and I had some money, which was a disaster, because money with no purpose, it's not a healthy thing. As
you get spent, right?
Oh man, does it get spent. So I had this money, and I had free time. So I had what people think they want, yeah? What I thought I wanted. I had money and free time, and I was young and fit. I was like 21. I was living in a city with my brother, free accommodation because he worked in the oil industry in Aberdeen, so I could live there with him. But I was so depressed. Like, what do? You go out and party, you go to the gym, you think you're having a great life, but it sucks. 2 or 3 weeks of this, and I was probably clinically depressed. I mean, I was really down. And I saw a job advertised in the local newspaper And it was actually door security, but it was at a student union. And at the time I was fit, strong, did various martial arts and loved a night out. And I thought, well, what could be better? I'll do this part-time job, at least to get myself out of the flat, not just be hanging around and spending money. So I got this job, and it was actually a very interesting way of doing door security, in that it wasn't just your massive, great big thug on the door stereotype, which I don't think is always true anyway. A lot of very intelligent people work their way through university by working as bouncers, for example. But these guys put you through quite a strong training program, including, some ex-military guys came and trained us. We had first aid training. Anyway, it was a pretty good program, and it was really interesting. And I realized at that point that being a decent doorman was a lot about listening and diplomacy. Mm-hmm. Obviously, when the shit hit the fan, you need to be able to handle yourself and deal with people physically. But a huge part of the job certainly should be diplomacy and listening. And that is a theme that's carried on with me. So at 21, I had that realization, I guess. But now at 43 as a coach, it's the same realization, the power of listening. It's phenomenal, and it's so rare in life, and it's what I love about coaching. So anyway, back to how I became a coach. So having done that for, a few months, and it was good fun. It was at a student union, one of my first jobs. So the main contenders for the violence were like the rugby clubs and things where they'd get drunk and you just have to throw them out. And they were big and strong, but not particularly good fighters as a rule, so it was fine. Right. So that went on for a few months, and it gave me a bit of purpose because I had something to do, and you could go and chat to people and speak to girls. And I was working there 7 evenings a week, and during the days I would train and do my thing, and it certainly felt a lot better than what I had been doing, just being basically unemployed but with money. And I read a newspaper article, and that imagination I mentioned fired up again. This newspaper article was about a personal trainer. Now, this is in 1996, I think, and there weren't very many personal trainers in those days. It was very unusual. And this guy, I think he was called Richard, and he worked in the City of London. And what he would do is he would go into companies and work with executives, and he would put them through various workouts. And having read this article, I just thought, wow, that would be really cool. I could do that. So that was what sparked my imagination. This guy, Richard. Thanks, Richard, whoever you are. I have no idea anything else about the guy. So I thought, well, how would one start as a personal trainer? I had a gym that I always trained at. I thought, I'll just ask the manager of the gym. How can I become a trainer in your gym? So I went and spoke to him, and he gave me some guidance on some courses that you would have to have done before he would allow you to be a trainer in his gym. Yes. And his was the best gym in the city at the time. And that's how it started. So from there, I ended up working in this gym, built up my own personal training practice, became relatively successful at it. I'm not going to make some massive claim, but there weren't too many of us there were a handful only in the city at that time, as far as I know. And I got basically headhunted by the best health and country club in the city. And that ended up, it kind of changed who I associated with, because then I was dealing with, suddenly all my clients were company owners, very senior people in oil companies. Right. And it was very different from what had been a good gym, but it was a city gym, mm-hmm. and it was just a different clientele. And I think that was a big step up. It also first introduced me to public speaking in a terrifying way, because I was asked to speak, and I jumped at the opportunity, but I realized I'd never really spoken in public before. Right. And it was a terrifying and rather traumatizing experience, Erik. So one I didn't want to repeat in a hurry, but that would have been in my late 20s, 27, 28 when that happened. So that's how I got into the coaching world, though, as it were. But in terms of coaching, not just in a physical capacity, well, to me, personal training was never just a physical thing. So during the years that I was a personal trainer, I did a lot of reading. I mm-hmm. also started attending coaching training, like specific life coaching, business coaching type trainings in London. And also, I think I went to one in Manchester. And yes, the power of listening was reinforced to me. It became clear to me that the way to retain clients as a personal trainer and coach was to be a more effective listener. What you're doing now very well, by the way. And not interrupting people, to try and find the interesting stories people have, because people often don't go to a personal trainer just to get a result. They might think they just want to lose weight and tone up. But the human condition is to want to be understood. And it doesn't take a psychologist or psychiatrist to know that, but it takes some discipline to live that, to actually listen to people. It can be hard to do because we all think we've got great ideas and we're all ready to talk over each other. Even coaches and counselors I know find it hard.
So I find it interesting. Yeah. I think you're right that listening is a skill that many of us have lost, I think. But as a coach, how do you, when you work with people, how do you then translate that listening into either advice, direction, help, angles, frameworks? How do, in a conversation, at what point, because at some point you need to help your client understand which direction to take or angles to take or what framework to use to understand the situation. So at what point and how do you then move from listening to advising?
It would be very rare that I would ever go to advising. So when we had our conversation earlier off air, we were talking about building a product or mentoring and coaching to build a product. I had asked permission to do that. So that's one thing I would always do as a coach. I would ask permission to chuck my ideas across. And I would always point out to a client too that I'm not attached to my ideas. But that would be one of the least used methods. Much more often I am simply finding something they say that they seem to particularly, it's a bit of a jargon word, but resonate with. When someone, you can kind of tell when somebody's coming alive with an idea, and I usually get goose pimples when it happens. You know, my hairs stand up a little bit, and you can just feel the energy in them if you're really listening to them. And so you hear that, and you just chuck out a challenge, I would say. So rather than advice, because they almost always have the answers themselves. So I throw a challenge, and I tell them, look, I'm going to challenge you, and you feel free to negotiate on my challenge. So I don't know. Let's say I might challenge someone to go and write their own eulogy, which is an exercise I got from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People years ago. So I might challenge them to do it, but in a specific way. And I might ask them to choose someone from their home life, their career, and their community life, something like that. And I might push for them to. They might have spoken about their daughter and this, their powerful bond with their daughter. So they might say, oh, I'm going to choose my wife to write the eulogy part from the family point of view. And I might push them and say, no, what about your daughter?
Job Insanity Podcast. How to spend the time of your life having the time of your life.
We were talking about not always having to advise and having challenges for people to get insights in certain things that they are thinking about. By the way, the thing you mentioned about when you're listening to people and you can see when something's happening, when you get these goosebumps, it's something that is very interesting because I've noticed that too. That if you're in a Skype call or if you're in a group discussion or if you're in a mastermind group, if you just listen and don't say anything, and the other person all of a sudden starts to be really excited, you say, wait a minute, there is energy there. There's something there. So I love that observation you made. I think it's really good. So please continue explaining. So you were saying that, sometimes you give people a challenge.
When it comes to advice though, so that's how I would tend to do things. But when it comes to advice, I mean, there's loads of great advice out there, but is it going to work? And the reason I say that is, I can listen to every Tim Ferriss podcast with all these billionaires, and they're great people and they've got great advice, I'm sure, but is their advice right for me or for you, Erik? Well, it might or might not be, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem to happen. How many people do you run into who say, do you know what, I listened to this great bit of advice from, name the guest on Tim Ferriss's show, and then this happened. Like, we kind of have to come to our own realizations, I believe anyway.
Right.
And so advice is overrated.
Right.
In simple terms, we kind of have to find our own advice, and we can be helped to do that for sure by coaches, counselors, people of whatever type, a good friend, a good listener. It can happen that way. It doesn't have to be a coach that you're paying.
Yeah. So this profession that you've chosen, being a coach, being a speaker, how does that sync with how you allocate your time? Does it give you freedom to do things you want to do outside of your professional life? And how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that?
I find it, I'll be honest with you, I find it hard to differentiate. Life is just life.
Okay.
So I'm not sure there is a professional Thor and a personal Thor. Like I'm just me, Coach Thor, a lot of the time. I'm not sure there's a differentiating line. Ask me that question another way.
So I've listened to some other of your interviews and I've read a little bit about you, and it seems like you like, sports and you do a lot of the outdoor things. I know you just came back from a holiday, and so when you are on those kind of events, or when you go out biking, or when you're out doing your physical things, does that synchronize or link somehow with your work as a coach?
Well, I think how I show up, so my energy and my attention for people is definitely influenced by everything else that I'm doing. So I'm not saying I'm perfect. Like I'm a terrible eater. I know about all the healthy things to eat, but I'm awful for gorging on things as well. You give me a packet of my favorite biscuits and I can eat the whole packet. Like I'm not saying I'm perfectly disciplined, but I recognize that exercising whenever I can, no matter what injuries I might be carrying, and enjoying the outdoors, like all those things fit together into making me a more positive, useful, listening person. Whereas for example, if I drink alcohol, I'm not teetotal, but I don't drink anywhere near what I used to as a young man, and I would quite like to be teetotal. It's something that's on my thinking process for potentially doing, because I recognize that. So for example, if last night I'd had a gin and tonic, I know I would not have had the same positive thoughts that I have this morning towards this conversation with you, for example. And I didn't want that to be the case. So I specifically chose last night, when I was tempted, I made the decision not to have a drink, not even one. And it's the same with exercise. I knew that if I went out for my mountain bike ride this morning, if I managed to fit that in along with family commitments, I would have more in the tank for you, for this conversation, for my coaching client at 2, and I've got one at 3. For spending time with my daughter tonight. It's dad-daughter night tonight. So all those things are affected by whether I do the exercise and whether I have that drink. So, but to me, it is all just it's all one thing. I'm not sure I've answered your question, but that's how I think about life. I find the dividing line hard. And this is something maybe you can help with. I find the commercial dividing line hard. So because I do love what I do when it comes to the coaching and the interviewing. Yeah, I would do that for free, but that's not how life works. You can't do everything for free because you have that's not the model of life. Like life works with currency, money. That's how we measure value. So you have to have a way of being remunerated, of charging for what you do. And I have a similar blurred line there because, well, I guess because it's who I am. Like, yeah, right. So. Your thoughts on that? Welcome.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. This year, I really picked up last year, I really picked up my exercise regime. I used to be really bad at it. I made a commitment. I'm going to the gym. I get a personal trainer. And the effect that has on my mental stability and clearness, as you mentioned. Like for me now, if I have a gin tonic, I can feel it the day after right away. It really impacts me now, and I think it's because you're detoxing your body, you're getting fresh, and I think by doing that, I think you can be more present. So I think it's quite an interesting observation. You use that time away and that, physical part to be present with people in your life, I guess, right? And that can be clients. It can also be your family.
Yeah, it's both.
It's both. Yeah.
They both have a high value. It's not a financial value. It's people that have made a decision or are close to you, and they deserve your best attention, I suppose. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm always perfect at it. You could ask my wife. For sure, I'm not always perfect at it.
Right. I just recently, somebody told me that, now I need to think that I'm saying it correctly. Quality time is not so much the time you spend with the other person, but the presence you give them when you're there. I thought that was very interesting. So you can be there, but not present. You can spend an hour with your child. There you go.
And that's the biggest killer these days. It has to be. How many marriages must have ended because of those things? This is put upside down while I'm in interview, by the way, so I cannot be tempted to look at it.
That's right. Yeah. So but I thought that was a very good sentence. So I'm really aware of that now, to be present, not to be distracted. Yeah. So, I want to touch a little bit on your podcast, because I think you've done this for quite a while, and you seem to be really excited about creating content. Can you tell us a little bit about the two podcasts that you're hosting, and what kind of, I think maybe not so much about the content, because people will be able to listen to it and we can refer them to it in this interview and in the show notes, but more what it does to you when you're speaking to guests, and why it's important to you.
It's interesting you would say what it does to me when I'm speaking to guests. It's more what it does to me when I've been listening to guests, and then afterwards, the feeling after a good interview. And I know it's been a good interview if I've listened effectively, haven't interrupted, unless a couple of accidental interruptions due to the Skype reception or something. And when I've really felt that they've become comfortable enough to open up and tell me stories that just work. You can tell they work. You can just feel it as you hear it. So that's it's really interesting that you would say what it does to me, because no one's asked me that before. So some of the best interviews, I can remember one or two. I'm not going to name check them because I wouldn't want anyone to think theirs wasn't a good interview. But some of them, you just come off the interview having listened effectively, and you know you've done a good job of asking a few key questions that got them to open up. And I'm just like whooping with delight. It's like when you get an amazing ski run, or in the old days when you had an incredible sparring session when you were fighting, or when you dance like you really don't care whether people are watching, or, it's that kind of feeling of euphoria is what it does to me. Like a good coaching session, it's the same thing. You just know when it's been nailed. And it's not that I've nailed it, like the relationship between the two of you or the three of you, if you've had two people on the call, it's the whole human relationship has worked. Right. So that's it. I mean, that's the thing for me, man. I mean, for me, I'm not a believer in any god or gods. So to me, it is about how we interact with humans. It doesn't get much better than that. I mean, nature's cool, but humans, we're really, really cool. And when you hit it, when you both hit it right and it worked, and they told stories and you listened well, it's awesome. It doesn't get much better than that. And it's the same coaching to me, because a good coach is a good listener. A good interview is, I think, a good listener. I know there's different types of interviewing. You maybe on the news, you want someone that's going to attack people and keep interrupting them, but I don't enjoy that as a viewer. I actually like interviewers in whatever context to ask their questions and then shut up. So that to me, that's what it does to me. A good interview. Does that cover it?
Yeah, sure. I sort of share that feeling with you, and the other feeling I then subsequently have is that, but this is so cool because I'm going to go and be able to share that with everybody else. So I was just in this conversation. It's a private conversation with you in this case, but we have the permission to share that with others, and then hopefully they will get the same feeling that we have when we're in the conversation. So I think that's really, really neat for this technology and this age that we're able to do that with such simple means, actually.
Yeah, that is true, Erik. It is. You can get, again, as the interviewer in that case, when you're creating a podcast, hearing back from people later, that's rather wonderful as well. It's not the same as the experience of being in it with the person, though. And for me personally, it's not as important, but it's great to know that people are appreciating it. Like, so for one example was I contacted an author and asked him if he would be on my Write with Courage podcast. Excuse me. And he came back to me and said, "Oh, yeah, I'm a listener to your show. I'd love to be on it." And that was really a special moment, because I thought, wow,
right.
Like this was, I'm not going to name him, but he's like a name author and he listens to the show. And I didn't know that. So that was really cool. Like, it's not that because he's an author, he's more important than other people, but it was a moment of, I don't know, that felt particularly satisfying. So yeah, but sharing with other people and having people come back and say they've enjoyed or got something interesting out of it. And often they'll find things that you didn't hear, which I also find fascinating. And I get people now will tweet me or just send me an email and suggest people, which I find very satisfying as well, because to me it means they're engaging with the people I'm interviewing enough. to want to go to the effort of, that is a value. They've gone to the effort of sending me their own suggestions. So right. That's what I get out of it. It's not a huge financial earner, although one of the podcasts I am paid by the media organization to create it. But that was something I pitched them. I explained that they needed to, like all paper, print media, they need to get into the technology world, even if they're not going to be able to bill for it, because it's either expected or without it, younger people are just not engaging with it. How many people pick up a newspaper and pay for it and read it these days? Even if they're free, most people don't bother. I was on a flight home from the Alps the other day. I went to the back of the plane. I was sitting at the front, but I went to the back of the plane to the toilet. On the way back, I did a little observation, left, right. I looked down. How many people are reading a newspaper? There were free newspapers at the airport. How many people are reading a newspaper? None. Everyone has a screen in front of them. Yes. Every single person, even the kids. Everyone's got an iPad or a phone. Right. Movies playing, their own movies, So that was my basic pitch to the newspapers as to why they needed to get into podcasting. Yeah.
A form of digital media. Yeah? They need to start learning. Yeah. And, I think by bringing you on, you have experience. I mean, it will shorten the time that they need to do to learn how to do it. So I think that's really good. I've got I'm aware of the time, and I have a few questions that I ask people sometimes that are a bit outside of topic, but I wonder what you're going to answer to it. So I'm gonna try it. I've got one question which I find very interesting for myself, and that is, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? When you look back.
Buy property and keep buying it. I mean, I'm not joking. Buy property, buy your own home, buy property, and then beg, borrow, or steal the money to buy another property, and then remortgage it and buy another property and keep buying property. That's the advice I would give to my 20-year-old self. It's the advice I'd give to my own child. You don't need to have the money yourself. You can borrow it. Buy property. That's because, to me, it's not. I don't believe there's really any such thing as passive income. There's always things you need to do to make anything work. As you know, I'm almost certain as a man who does property, but the need for homes and places to do business. Well, maybe the need for places to do business is going away to a degree, but the need for homes isn't going away, and the number of people who can get mortgages isn't necessarily going up, and supply and demand says invest in property. So that would be the advice I would give. Is that what you expected me to say?
No, not really, but it's an interesting answer. And, I hope to help people at some stage also to do more with this and to, help them get into this property stage and property business. But I don't think it's too late to do that at any stage. But I think you're right. I mean, if you could do this when you're young, start creating rental income, I mean, that can do something to your life and give you options that are maybe not there when you don't. So I think that's a really interesting answer.
I mean, it is one of those amazing things that people assume you need loads of money to have any involvement in property. And I've never had loads of money because of my freedom choice over security. And yet, for example, I once bought a flat, an apartment valued at £62,500, and I got it for £34,500. And my lawyer just said, you can't do that. And I said, well, why not? We've agreed this deal. The guy wants out of the property for these reasons, X, Y, Z. Now, how did I find that out? I sat and listened to him. And I actually tried to help him work out other ways of getting a better price. But all I could afford to give him was that amount because of the way my numbers worked. And I had zero money. I had literally not one penny, never mind £34,500. But what I did have is some people that trust me for good reason, because I paid them all back. But I just went to these various people and said, I need this much money. I'll give you this much interest. And so I borrowed the entire amount I needed to buy the place at £34,500. And I got another lawyer because that lawyer wouldn't do the deal. And it was all legal. It was all legal, fine, totally legitimate. Then I kept the property for 6 months, refurbished it. I've had it for about 8 years now. It's always been tenanted. It's a good apartment in the city centre. And it's a good apartment now that we've refurbished it. I paid everyone back, including their interest. The guy who sold the flat to me, he used to send me, not now, but for a few years, he sent me a text at Christmas saying Merry Christmas. So he was happy with the deal. He got out of his debts and out of the property. There were some hidden problems with it, but nothing major, a few grand's worth. But he definitely didn't want to be dealing with these hidden problems that he didn't tell me about. But that's just one story, and that I wish I had loads more of those stories. But my point is, there's probably something powerful about listening when it comes to doing the deals in property, where I think a lot of people think they have to have sharp angles and they need to be able to kind of out-negotiate someone and be really smart. Well, maybe you do, but maybe there's something in the listening to hear what people really want and need out of a deal.
Yeah. Before I ask my last closing question of the interview, if people would like to get in touch with you and want to, reach out to either your coaching business or just want to say hi to you, how can they best get in touch with you?
So they can go to my website, just my name.com, Thor Holt, THORHOLT.com. You'll find the podcast there, but also you'll find it on iTunes, and it is called Write with Courage, as in writer, Write with Courage. And the headline quote for the show is, "An idea that is not dangerous is not worthy of being called an idea at all." And that's Oscar Wilde who said that. But yeah, you'll find everything there. Or you can find me on Twitter. I love to have a bit of a conversation on Twitter and connect with people there. Again, it's just my name, @ThorHolt. Those are the two best places. I'm not a big fan of Facebook since they started colluding with the Chinese and the Pakistani governments on blasphemy and for Pakistan. And what was the other one? And with China, it's like they're happy to basically censor. You can't look up Tiananmen Square, blah, blah. Anyway, so I'm not a fan of Facebook just for reasons of ethics. So I'm not really much of a user there. But yeah, Twitter and my main home page, thorholt.com.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's how we got in touch, and I can testify to the fact that you are responding very quickly to people that reach out, and I really like that. I mean, I appreciate that about you. My last question, and it can be a very short or a very long answer, it depends on you, but the last question I have for this show is, what does the word freedom mean to you?
Oh, have we got 60 minutes?
If you have it, I have it.
Freedom is it. I mean, freedom is all. It's everything. It's without it. I won't say what's the point, because there's always the hope of freedom. So if you read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is by far and away my kind of favorite book, if I can even use that term about such a heavy book. But he was in, well, not obviously, people might not know, but he was in the Nazi death camps, and his family were all killed, and obviously a lot of his friends, and he managed to get through it, and he came out still being a loving human being, and it's a pretty incredible book, Man's Search for Meaning. But freedom, he didn't really have freedom in physical terms, but what he chose to have was a form of mental freedom, I guess. And his theory was something like, if you have a why, you can live with any how. I mean, it's easy to say that, and it's possibly even a bit cliched, but if you've actually had your family killed, I mean, what's your why at that point? I guess it's the hope of some form of future, or it's trying to build relationships with people in that moment, in that time. So there's always the freedom to choose, which that is definitely a cliched thing, but to me it is everything. Like in the last gasp, in the last moment when you've got nothing else, no money, no family, nothing else, you still have that, hopefully, you still have that freedom to choose hope, I suppose, in simple terms. So that's freedom to me. So yeah, I could go on all day about it. I mean, without freedom to say what we like and to come up with new ideas and to say things that some people might consider blasphemous, like Galileo did about whether the earth went around the sun or vice versa, progress is very difficult. So to me, freedom is so fundamental, and I haven't got anywhere near to where I need to get in terms of promoting freedom, but it's what I love about coaching, is trying to help people find their own personal freedom. So yeah, it's what I want for my kid, for my family, for my friends. It's everything.
That's a beautiful answer. want to acknowledge you for, you do a lot of work in sharing stories, in capturing stories from other people. And I think stories are what make life interesting. And you're one of the people, I think, that tells very good stories, but also you share other people's stories. And I think it's really wonderful. So thanks for being on the show. I hope to talk a bit longer at some other stage because it was way too short. But for the podcast, I would like to keep it a bit shorter and not make it too long. So thanks a lot for being on the show, Thor.
Nice one. Thanks, Erik.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Job Insanity Podcast. Please visit jobinsanity.com for more information and show notes.